My son had no idea my income had just jumped to $75,000 a month when he yelled, "Get out, you broke nobody," and threw hot coffee at me. I didn't say a word, I just left. But the next day, his whole face went pale when I pulled up in a brand new luxury sports car and... Could you imagine being an elderly woman, forced to live under your own son's roof, treated like a glorified servant, only to discover you were holding the golden key to an empire capable of turning your life, and there's completely upside down? Because that's exactly what happened to me. The air in my son's suburban home always felt heavy, thick with unspoken expectations and thinly veiled resentment. It was a stifling existence, a stark contrast to the independent life I'd built. Most of my peers, at 68, were enjoying their golden years, surrounded by grandkids, but I was living in a guest room, flinching at every creak on the stairs, my world reduced to a meager pension and the scraps of dignity I could salvage. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I spent my entire career as an accountant for Edward Pierce's construction company in San Antonio. It wasn't glamorous, but it was rock-solid stability, a lifeline after my husband, Arthur, died suddenly of a heart attack when our children were just 8, 12, and 14. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Arthur came home, complained of heartburn, took a pill, and then, just 20 minutes later, I heard a terrible sound and saw him collapse. The ambulance arrived, but it was too late. I was left alone, a mortgage to pay and 3 young children to raise. Edward Pierce was my salvation. He was an understanding boss, letting me work from home when the kids were sick, never questioning in advance when unexpected expenses arose. I worked for him for 34 years, right up until I retired 3 years ago. My children grew up to be vastly different people. Clara, my middle child, is the most sensitive. She became an elementary school teacher, married a programmer named Mark, and has 2 wonderful children, Leo and Ruby. They live in Portland, call regularly, and always send a package of thoughtful gifts and handmade cards at Christmas. David, my youngest, inherited Arthur's passion for electronics. He's an engineer in Chicago, doesn't call as often as Clara, but every month a small sum of money appears in my account, even though I've repeatedly told him I'm fine. He divorced his wife, Sarah, last year, no kids. He sounds a bit lost on the phone, but he's slowly adjusting to bachelor life. Then there's Stephen, my eldest. He was always a difficult child, impulsive, stubborn, and prone to little lies. Arthur was better at handling his temper. After Arthur passed, I often lacked the strength or patience. Maybe I made mistakes with him, or maybe that's just how he is. Stephen works as an insurance appraiser and married Michelle at 26, a woman with high society aspirations, despite being a fitness club administrator. They have 2 children, Noah, 15, and Grace, 13. My decision to move in with them wasn't spontaneous. After retirement, I stayed in my small house, finally paid off just before I stopped working. My pension was modest, but enough, supplemented by some accounting consulting for small businesses. Then, last fall, a flood devastated my basement and first floor. Insurance covered only part of the repairs, wiping out almost all my savings. I was staring at a pile of bills, wondering if I'd have to sell my grandmother's silver. That's when Stephen called. "Mom, how would you feel about moving in with us?" he asked, with uncharacteristic concern. "The kids miss their grandma and Michelle, and I would feel better if you were around. We could even rent out your house for some extra income." I didn't agree immediately. My relationship with Stephen had always been rocky, and Michelle and I barely spoke at family gatherings. But Stephen persisted, and eventually I caved. I sold most of my furniture, rented my house out for just enough to cover taxes and insurance, and moved with 2 suitcases to their house on the outskirts of San Antonio. The first few days were surprisingly good. Michelle was unusually friendly, showed me my guest room downstairs, and even cleared a spot in the fridge. My grandchildren, whom I usually saw once a year, were wary but polite. "We're so glad you're here, Mom," Stephen said, his arm around my shoulders. "Don't worry about a thing. Just live and enjoy yourself." On the evening of the 3rd day, as we sat in the backyard, Michelle barbecuing, the kids playing badminton, Stephen and I with lemonades under a large umbrella, He dropped it. By the way, Mom, he began casually. Michelle and I work a lot, and the kids are teenagers. They need supervision. Would you mind picking them up from school and making dinner sometimes? Just a couple of times a week when we have late shifts. Of course, I agreed. I was living there rent-free. Helping with the grandchildren seemed the least I could do. But a couple of times a week swiftly morphed into a daily chore. Michelle started staying late, then signed up for manicure and pedicure classes. To develop professionally, she'd say, followed by yoga classes for mental balance. By the end of the first month, I was cooking breakfast, lunch, and dinner, doing laundry, ironing, cleaning the house, picking up the kids, helping with homework, and driving them to activities. My opinions, however, were never considered, and any initiative was met with irritation. One day, I made a casserole from my mother's recipe. "What is this disgusting stuff?" Michelle grimaced, barely glancing at the dish. "You know I don't eat gluten." "But there's no gluten in it," I stammered. "Just vegetables, a little cheese, and I said I don't eat it," she snapped, turning to the children. "Shall we order pizza?" They nodded happily, while Stephen didn't even look up from his phone. Another time, I bought Noah a new shirt for a school holiday. All his others looked worn. "What are you doing?" Stephen snapped when Noah showed off the shirt. "Are you trying to show we can't provide for our own son? Give that rag back and stay out of our business." "I just wanted to help," I tried to explain. "And it's not cheap junk. It's good quality, who cares?" Stephen threw the shirt on the floor. "We don't need your charity." He didn't speak to me for a week after that, and Michelle took every opportunity to make snide remarks about certain pensioners who stick their noses in other people's business. Worst of all, my grandchildren quickly adopted their parents' attitude. At first, they at least said hello. Now, they pretended I didn't exist. Noah, when he thought I couldn't hear, called me an old hag. And Grace would wrinkle her nose, declaring I smelled old. I tried to talk to Stephen, but he dismissed me. "Stop being so dramatic, Mom. You live in our house for free, so be thankful." My only escape was the occasional phone call from Clara and David. Clara always started by asking how I was, listening carefully to my cautious answers. I never complained. I didn't want to ruin their sibling relationships. But I think she sensed something was wrong. "Mom, you don't have to live with Stephen," she'd say. "Mark and I would love for you to move in with us. Portland is too damp for my joints, dear," I joke, "and besides, you have enough on your plate with the children." David was less perceptive, but in every conversation, he offered financial help. "Mom, I can send you more money. Just tell me how much you need." "I have everything I need, son," I'd reply. "You'd better buy yourself something nice." In contrast to these warm conversations, life at Stephen's house was soul-crushing. I felt like an unwelcome guest, tolerated only for the benefits I provided. Michelle openly discussed with her friends on the phone how lucky she was to have a free housekeeper and babysitter. Meanwhile, Stephen, if I dared ask for the slightest help, like a ride to the clinic, would sigh and roll his eyes. "Don't I have anything else to do? Call a taxi." By the end of the third month, I was seriously contemplating moving back to my own home, even if it meant going into debt to break the lease. But then, a phone call came that changed everything. It was Tuesday around 5 p.m. Michelle wasn't home, the kids were at practice, and Stephen wouldn't be back until 8. I was cooking dinner when my old phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I was about to hang up. Scammers called constantly, but something made me answer. "Eleanor, this is Edward Pierce. I don't know if you remember your old boss." Edward's voice sounded weaker than I remembered, but it was definitely him, with his characteristic hoarseness and slight Texas accent. "Of course I do, Mr. Pierce," I replied, surprised. "How are you?" "Been better, Eleanor. Been better." He sighed heavily. "Listen, we need to talk. It's important, and not something we can discuss over the phone. Can you come into the office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I hesitated. Tomorrow was Wednesday. I had to pick up Grace at 2 and take her to piano lessons. "This is really important, Eleanor." Edward's voice was almost pleading. "I wouldn't bother you if there was anyone else I could ask." "All right, Mr. Pierce," I decided. "I'll be at your office at 10 tomorrow." "Thank you, Eleanor. And be prepared for a serious conversation." He hung up, leaving me completely baffled. We hadn't spoken since I retired. What could possibly make him need me? And why did his voice sound so doomed? The morning was cool, even for late April. I woke at 5 a.m., long before anyone else, to make breakfast and get myself ready. Thoughts of the conversation had kept me awake most of the night. Edward Pierce Construction's office was in the same building where I'd worked for most of my life, but inside, much had changed. Modern glass partitions replaced old walls, trendy coffee machines and water coolers were everywhere, and young employees with tablets zipped around. The reception desk was now manned by a girl with bright red hair and piercings, the complete opposite of the stern Mrs. Becker who used to greet visitors. "I have an appointment with Mr. Pierce," I said, approaching the desk. "Eleanor Vance." The girl looked up, gave me a once-over, and nodded, clearly surprised. "Mr. Pierce is waiting for you. 4th floor, down the hall, last door." As I rode the elevator, I nervously tugged at my old tweed jacket. I'd bought it when I worked here. It still looked decent. I always took good care of my clothes. Edward's office had changed too, more spacious, modern furniture, huge windows overlooking San Antonio's business district. But Edward himself, sitting at his massive desk, looked far worse than I remembered. He'd lost a lot of weight, his hair was completely gray, and there were deep shadows under his eyes. When he stood to greet me, I noticed a slight limp. "Eleanor," he exclaimed, with a warmth I hadn't expected. "How wonderful to see you. Please have a seat." He pointed to the chair across from his desk, then walked around to sit next to me, abandoning the formal distance of a boss. "You haven't changed a bit," he smiled. "But you," I began, then stopped myself, not wanting to be tactless. "I look terrible, I know." Edward waved his hand. "Pancreatic cancer, late stage. Doctors give me 3 to 6 months." I gasped, pressing a hand to my lips. Edward had always been the embodiment of vitality to me, energetic, active, tireless. Seeing him so weakened was painful. "I'm so sorry," I murmured. "Don't be," he smiled weakly. "I've had a good life, Eleanor. I built a successful business, raised a daughter, even played with my grandchildren. But that's not the point." He paused, as if gathering strength. "I invited you here because the company is in danger. After I was diagnosed, I started preparing to sell the business. I want the employees protected and my family to get a good deal. But my CFO, Martin Gray, do you remember him?" I nodded. Martin had joined a couple of years before I retired, a slick young Wall Street guy Edward had hired to modernize the finance department. "He's cooking the books," Edward continued, lowering his voice. "Hiding assets, underreporting profits, creating fictitious debts. He's laying the groundwork to buy the company for a song after I die. I have proof, but I need someone who understands all the schemes and can help fix the situation before the sale." "And you thought of me?" I asked, surprised. "But I've been retired for 3 years. Everything has changed. New programs, new methods." Edward covered my hand with his dry and hot. "You're the best accountant I've ever worked with. You have a sharp mind and tremendous integrity. I trust you more than anyone else in this company. But listen," he squeezed my hand tighter, "I'm offering you the position of Chief Financial Officer, with full access to all documents and signing authority. And a salary of $75,000 a month." I gasped. The amount he named was astronomical, tens of times more than I'd ever earned. "That's impossible," I breathed. "You could hire anyone on Wall Street for that kind of money." "That's where Martin came from," Edward said with a bitter smile. "No, I need someone I can trust, someone who knows the company from the inside and won't sell it out for their own gain." He handed me a folder of documents. "Here's a 6-month contract. That should be enough time to get everything in order and prepare the company for an honest sale. Take a look. Think about it, but don't drag your feet. Time is against us." I took the folder with trembling hands. The offer felt unreal, like something out of a movie. $75,000 a month. Even for 6 months, that was more than I'd earned in the last 10 years of my career. "What about Martin?" I asked. "He'll just give up his position?" "I fired him this morning." Edward allowed himself a faint smile. "Security is already packing his things. He'll threaten to sue, of course, but I have enough evidence of his shenanigans that he'll prefer to leave quietly. I need to think about it, I said, still disbelieving. Of course, Edward nodded. But I hope you'll agree. You're the only one who can save what I've built my whole life. I returned home in a complete daze, the folder with the contract burning in my hands, 1,000 thoughts swirling in my head. On one hand, this was a chance not only for financial independence, but to help a man who had always been good to me. On the other hand, I wasn't sure that at my age, I could handle such responsibility. I stopped outside Stephen's house, catching my breath. I had to come up with an explanation for my absence. Grace had probably already come home, complaining that her grandmother hadn't picked her up. I was right. As soon as I stepped inside, an angry Michelle confronted me. "Where have you been?" she snapped. Grace had to take the bus. She missed her piano lesson. I had to go to the clinic, I lied, deciding not to mention Edward's offer. A spot suddenly opened up with a cardiologist, and I'd been waiting 2 months for this appointment. "And you couldn't have warned me?" Michelle crossed her arms. "I missed an important meeting with a client because of you. I had to ask for time off to pick up Grace. I tried to call you, but my phone died. I continued to fabricate." "I'm sorry, Michelle. It won't happen again." "Like hell it won't," she snorted. "Stephen is going to be furious." And indeed, that evening I endured a long, angry tirade from my son about my irresponsibility and ingratitude. "We took you in, gave you a roof over your head, and what do?" he shouted, spittle flying. "You let us down at the first opportunity." "Stephen," I tried to explain. "I don't care about your explanations." He slammed his fist on the table. "Either you do your job or pack your things and go back to your hole." I lowered my head silently. Arguing with Stephen was useless, especially when he was in this mood. Besides, my mind was entirely preoccupied with something else, the contract still in my bag. That night, when the house was quiet, I took out the documents and studied them carefully by the light of a small desk lamp. The terms were beyond generous. Besides the astronomical salary, Edward offered premium health insurance, a company car, and a bonus upon the successful sale of the company. The contract was well written, with no hidden clauses, even providing for compensation in the event of early termination. I spent a sleepless night weighing the pros and cons. By morning, the decision was made. I would accept Edward's offer. It was not only a chance to help someone who had always supported me, but an opportunity to regain control of my own life. I called him first thing in the morning, as soon as Stephen and Michelle left for work and the kids went to school. "I accept," I said without preamble. "Great." Edward's voice sounded relieved. "When can you start?" "Tomorrow." "I'll see you at the office at 9 a.m., Eleanor." "Thank you." After hanging up, I considered how to organize my new life. First, should I tell my family? After yesterday's scene, I was inclined to keep it a secret, at least for now. Knowing Stephen and Michelle, I could guess they'd immediately demand money for repairs, a new car, or private school for the kids. No, I'd better get on my feet first, save enough for my own place, and then decide. As a cover story, I invented that I'd signed up as a volunteer at the local library, where they needed help sorting books and assisting visitors. That would explain my absence on weekdays and sound plausible enough for a woman of my age. That evening, I cautiously mentioned my volunteering over dinner, trying to look casual. "The library?" Stephen asked, mouth full. "Why do that?" "So I don't sit at home all day," I shrugged. "I need something to do, to be around people." "Who's going to pick up the kids from school?" Michelle immediately chimed in. "And cook dinner?" "I've arranged to work part-time," I lied. "I'll be done by 2, so I'll have time for the kids and dinner." Stephen and Michelle exchanged glances, clearly dissatisfied, but couldn't directly argue. After all, it was unpaid, so they couldn't accuse me of ulterior motives. "Just don't let it interfere with your duties here," Stephen warned. "We didn't take you in so you could entertain yourself with books." "Of course, dear," I replied meekly, suppressing the urge to tell him the truth about how much I would now be earning. The next day, I started my new life at Edward Pierce Construction. The first few weeks were incredibly difficult. I had to quickly learn new computer programs, decipher Martin's convoluted diagrams, and build relationships with coworkers, many of whom regarded me with poorly concealed skepticism. But gradually, things started to fall into place. My many years of experience at the company proved invaluable. I knew all the ins and outs, remembered the history of countless projects, and quickly reestablished old connections with clients and partners. Accounting had always been my strong suit, and Martin's schemes, though clever, were still unravelable. Edward, despite his declining health, came into the office every other day, spending long hours bringing me up to speed and supporting my decisions before the board of directors. "You're doing even better than I expected," he told me after a particularly successful meeting where we presented a debt restructuring plan. "I knew I was right about you, Eleanor." His words meant more to me than all the money in the world. For the first time in a long time, I felt needed, competent, respected. It was an intoxicating feeling, especially in contrast to how I was treated at home. At home, the situation only worsened. Michelle, unhappy that I now had to divide my time between volunteering and household chores, became even more nitpicky and sarcastic. "You've oversalted the soup again," she grimaced at dinner. "And the laundry isn't ironed properly. Maybe you should spend less time on your books and more time taking care of the family that took you in." Stephen supported her in everything, adding his own complaints. "Mom, you've been kind of distracted lately. Yesterday, you forgot to buy my favorite cheese. Today, you didn't write down a message from my boss. It's all because of your stupid library. Maybe you should stop playing charity." But the worst were the grandchildren. Now that Noah and Grace realized their parents wouldn't reprimand them, they stopped even pretending to be polite. Once, I caught Grace rummaging through my bag. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to hide my alarm. There was a pay slip in the bag. "Looking for money," she replied cheekily. "I need a new phone case." "Grace, you can't take other people's things without asking," I said, carefully taking the bag from her. "If you need money, ask your parents." "What could I possibly take from you?" the girl snorted. "You have nothing. You're a bum." I froze at such blunt rudeness. But before I could respond, Michelle entered the room. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking from her daughter to me. "Grandma won't give me money for a cover," Grace complained immediately. "And she hides her stupid bag from us." She was rummaging through my things, I tried to explain. "What secrets could you possibly have?" Michelle interrupted. "You live in our house. You eat our food. If my daughter asks you for something, you have to help her, but no buts." Michelle cut me off. "Give her the money for the cover since she's asking. I don't think you have anything more important to spend it on." I silently took out my wallet and handed Grace $20, an amount I'd been saving for new tights. The girl snatched the bill with a triumphant grin and ran out. "And remember," Michelle poked me with her finger, "no secrets in my house." "Got it." After she left, I sat down on the bed, trying to stop my hands from shaking. I needed to find a more secure place to hide my work documents. Another time, Noah accidentally spilled orange juice on my favorite blouse, which I just had dry cleaned for an important meeting with investors. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said with feigned remorse. "I didn't notice." "It's okay," I sighed, knowing it wasn't an accident. The boy looked too pleased with himself. "Come on, Mom," Stephen interjected as I began to wash the stain. "It's just an old rag. You can buy yourself a new one someday." They laughed, father and son, exchanging knowing glances. I said nothing, but inside I felt a knot of hurt and anger. That night, lying in bed, I allowed myself to really think about how my life would change with my new salary. I could rent a beautiful apartment, buy a car, travel. I could help Clara and David, spoil their children. I could cut off all contact with Stephen and his family if I wanted to. It was an intoxicating, dizzying freedom, and I fell asleep with a smile on my face, imagining Stephen's face when he found out the truth. But in the morning, common sense prevailed. I had to proceed cautiously. First, I needed to save enough money, find a place to live, and perhaps consult a lawyer about my will. I didn't want Stephen to get a penny of my money after I died. In the meantime, I had to endure daily humiliation and pretend that everything was fine. Every morning, I went to the library, worked myself to exhaustion in the office, and then returned home to cook, clean, and listen to complaints and ridicule. Sometimes it felt like I was living a double life, a successful financial director by day and a powerless servant by night. It was exhausting, but the thought that things would soon change gave me strength. "Hang in there, Eleanor," Edward encouraged me, noticing the circles under my eyes. "You're doing an incredible job. Just a little more, and we'll get the company out of this crisis." I smiled gratefully, not telling him about my domestic problems. He had enough worries of his own. Edward's health was deteriorating daily, and at times it seemed he held on only by sheer force of will, wanting to see his business saved. And at home, new trials awaited me. Michelle suddenly decided I should also take on cleaning the garage and backyard. "You sit in your library all day," she said. "Consider it compensation for your absence." "But I already do all the housework," I tried to argue, "and the library is work, too, even if it's unpaid. Who needs your fussing with books?" Michelle snapped. "You live here for free, so be nice and work for it." I gritted my teeth and said nothing. The weekdays blended into one endless marathon. I woke at 5 a.m., made breakfast for everyone, packed school lunches, and then slipped out quietly while everyone slept. On my way to the office, I stopped at a cafe for a coffee, a small luxury I could now afford. By 8:30, I was at my desk, sifting through financial reports. The work was more difficult than I'd expected. Martin had left a real mess of fake documents, hidden accounts, and confusing transactions. But methodically, step by step, I untangled the knot. "Eleanor, you're a miracle," Edward said, looking over my reports. "You've done more in 3 weeks than Martin did in 3 years. "I just know the company," I shrugged, but inside, I was beaming with pride. By early June, we'd uncovered and corrected most of Martin's schemes, restored normal relations with key suppliers, and recovered assets he'd tried to siphon off. There was still work to do, but the hardest part was behind us. With my first paycheck, I allowed myself a few small pleasures. I bought a new phone, replacing my ancient flip phone. I ordered some nice cosmetics and went to a salon where I got a modern haircut and color to cover my gray. The rest of the money went into a separate account, saving for my own place. These small changes didn't escape Michelle's watchful eye. "Did you get your hair done?" she asked one evening, squinting. "And is that a new phone?" "Yes," I said, trying to sound casual. There was a volunteer event at the library, free haircuts from hairdressing college students. And Clara gave me the phone for my birthday. "Your birthday is in November," Michelle remarked dryly. "It's a belated gift," I quickly replied. She was saving up for it. Michelle clearly didn't believe me, but she didn't pursue the subject, more interested in whether I'd made the lasagna she'd asked for dinner. At the office, I felt completely different. There, I was a respected professional, my opinion valued, my decisions carrying weight. Young employees, initially skeptical of the old lady from the last century, now came to me for advice. Even the board members, initially opposed to my appointment, recognized my competence. "Mrs. Vance, you've done an amazing job restructuring the debt with Gardner Investments," Charles Hayes, the most conservative and nitpicky director, told me one day. "I think we all underestimated you." I nodded, accepting the compliment, smiling inwardly, imagining Stephen's reaction if he heard his mother spoken of with such respect. At home, the situation grew increasingly tense. Stephen and Michelle seemed determined to squeeze every last drop out of me. Now, my duties included cleaning, cooking, childcare, laundry, ironing, gardening, walking the dog, and helping Noah with his math homework. "Mom, you're an accountant," Stephen would say, ignoring my protest that I was tired after a long day at the library. "Explain these fractions to him." "I don't have time." "And I do." I finally snapped. Stephen stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. "Of course, you have time," he said slowly. "What else do you do? Your volunteer work is just a hobby that we graciously allow you to do." "I'm a person, too," I said quietly. "I have my own things to do and needs to fulfill." "What other needs?" he snorted. "You have a roof over your head and food to eat. What more do you want?" Instead of complaining, "You should be grateful that we took you in." There was such sincere conviction in his voice that I realized it was useless to argue. He truly believed he was doing me a huge favor by letting me live in his house and that I should be immensely grateful. I said nothing, swallowing my resentment, and went to help Noah with his math. The boy greeted me with undisguised contempt. Don't think I'm going to listen to some old woman. Just do my homework for me. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that things would soon change. Just a little longer, and I would leave with my head held high. Edward noticed my state and kept me in his office after a meeting one day. Is something wrong, Eleanor? He asked with genuine concern. You look exhausted. I wanted to brush it off, to say everything was fine. But suddenly, I felt I couldn't keep it all inside anymore. And I told him everything, about my life with Stephen and his family, the constant humiliation, how hard it was to lead a double life. Edward listened attentively, without interrupting. When I finished, he shook his head. Eleanor, why do you put up with this? You now have the means to live on your own. I'm saving up for a place, I explained. I want to have a nest egg before I take the plunge. That's wise, he nodded. But don't forget that life is too short to waste on those who don't appreciate you. His words struck a chord, especially considering his own situation. Edward was fading before our eyes. Every day could be his last, but he kept coming to the office, solving problems, making plans for a company he would never see. You're right to want to be financially independent, he continued. But don't let them break your spirit. You're a wonderful woman, Eleanor, and you deserve respect. After that conversation, something shifted in me. I still did my chores at home, but I no longer tried to please Stephen and Michelle. If they asked for something clearly excessive, I calmly refused. If the children were rude, I didn't swallow my resentment, but firmly pointed out that such behavior was unacceptable. Of course, this didn't go unnoticed. Michelle complained to Stephen that I had completely let myself go, and he, in turn, reprimanded me, to which I responded politely but without my former submissiveness. What's going on with you, Mom? He asked once, when I refused to sew all his shirts in one evening. You've become different. I'm just a human being, Stephen, I replied. And I have my limits. Are we asking too much of you? He asked, looking offended. After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me? I asked quietly. What do you mean, what have we done for you? He looked genuinely surprised. We gave you a roof over your head, food, a family. Without us, you'd be living alone in your ramshackle shack with no one to care about you. In his eyes, I saw absolute conviction that he was right. For Stephen, this wasn't manipulation, but a statement of fact. He truly believed he was doing me a great favor. For the first time, I realized how deep the chasm between us was. My own son didn't see me as a person, but as a function, a tool for his convenience. No words I could say would change that perception. From that moment on, I began counting the days until I could leave. Every morning, leaving for work, I'd mentally note another day gone. Every evening, returning to Stephen's house, I'd tell myself, this is temporary. My inner alienation must have been noticeable because the attitude towards me at home grew worse. Michelle stopped even pretending to be polite. Noah and Grace openly ignored my requests and instructions. Stephen increasingly spoke to me in an irritated tone, as if I were a disobedient child. In mid-July, when my bank account held enough money for the first month's rent, something happened that finally decided everything. It was Saturday, a day off. For the first time in a long time, I had the whole day free. The office had declared a cleaning day, and I told my family I was doing inventory at the library. I planned to spend the day looking at apartment listings, maybe even seeing a couple of options. But Stephen and Michelle had other plans. Mom, Michelle, and I want to go see this new movie, my son announced at breakfast. Will you watch the kids? I have some things planned for today, I replied cautiously. What things? Michelle didn't even look up from her phone. You have the day off. You could spend it doing something useful, spending time with your grandchildren. I have a doctor's appointment, I lied, knowing they wouldn't believe me anyway. The orthopedist for my arthritis. I've been waiting 2 months for this appointment. Reschedule it, Stephen shrugged. It's not that urgent. I can't reschedule, I tried to say firmly but calmly. The doctor is very busy. And the next appointment won't be until September. So what? Michelle interjected. You can wait until September. You won't fall apart. We want to go to the movies. My knees hurt already. I decided to stand my ground. I need to see the doctor. God, Mom. Stephen rolled his eyes. Always your health problems. Why can't you just help your family when they ask you to? I help you every day. My patience was wearing thin. I cook, clean, pick up the kids from school, help with homework. Can I have one day to myself? To yourself? Stephen asked, sounding as surprised as if I'd said something absurd. What would you do to yourself? You're retired. You don't have a job, hobbies, or friends. Your life is us, your family. I have my own life, I said quietly, but firmly. And my own needs. What needs does an old woman have? Michelle snorted, not looking up from her phone. The main need at your age is to be useful to your family, not a burden. I looked at her, then at Stephen, who was nodding in agreement with his wife's every word, and realized the conversation was pointless. They truly didn't see me as a person with my own desires and rights. I'm sorry, but I can't babysit tonight, I said, getting up from the table. I have to go to the doctor. Didn't you hear what we said? Stephen raised his voice. You're not going anywhere. You're staying with the kids. No, I said firmly, for the first time. I'm not staying. Stephen's face turned red with anger. He jumped up from his chair and loomed over me. What do you mean no? You live in my house. You eat my food, and you'll do what I tell you. I'm your mother, not your servant. I tried to speak calmly, though I was trembling inside. And I have a right to my own time. What right? Stephen roared. You live here out of the goodness of our hearts. Out of the goodness of our hearts, do you understand? If it weren't for us, you'd be living in your hole, counting pennies until you retired. His words hurt more than I expected. Not because they were true, I knew I could now afford a much better life than Stephen's, but because they reflected his attitude toward me, contempt, superiority, a complete lack of respect. I'm leaving, I said, feeling strangely calm. I'm going to see the doctor now, and we'll talk tonight when you've calmed down. I turned to leave the kitchen, but Stephen grabbed my arm, squeezing my wrist painfully. You're not going anywhere. I told you, you're staying with the kids. Let go. I tried to free myself. You're hurting me. Hurting you. He laughed maliciously. You don't know what hurting is yet, you ungrateful old hag. We took you in, gave you a home, and instead of gratitude, you throw a scene. Michelle stared at her phone as if nothing unusual was happening. Let me go, Stephen, I repeated right now. Or what? He squeezed my hand even tighter. What are you going to do, you beggar? Where will you go without us? Who needs you? Something broke inside me at that moment. Years of hurt, humiliation, and rejection poured out. I pulled my hand away and, to my own surprise, shouted, I need myself. I'm a human being, not a thing. I'm your mother who raised you alone after your father died, who worked 2 jobs so you could go to college, and this is how you thank me. By treating me like a servant. By humiliating me in front of my own grandchildren. My screams seemed to stun everyone. Michelle even looked up from her phone, and the children froze with their mouths open. But Stephen quickly regained his composure. How dare you raise your voice to me in my own house, he hissed, grabbing his mug of hot tea from the table. You. He didn't finish his sentence. Instead, he threw the hot tea in my face. The scalding liquid ran down my cheeks, neck, and chest, soaking my blouse. I screamed in pain and surprise. Get out, you beggar. Stephen yelled, pushing me toward the door. Get out of my house. You're no longer part of this family. You're nobody. Do you hear me? Nobody. Shocked, my face and clothes wet with tea, I backed toward the door. Stephen's eyes burned with a fury I had never seen before. Behind him stood Michelle and the children, unperturbed, indifferent, as if what was happening was a normal family argument and not the expulsion of an elderly woman from her home. Pack your things and get out. Stephen continued to shout. I'll give you 10 minutes, then I'll throw everything out onto the street. I turned silently and went to my room. My hands were shaking. My face was burning from the tea and humiliation. But inside, I felt a strange emptiness. It was as if something important that connected me to this house, to these people, had finally been severed. I quickly gathered the essentials, my documents, my phone, a few changes of clothes. I could pick up the rest later or buy new things. Right now, the main thing was to get out of this house where I had been humiliated for so long. Passing by the kitchen, I heard Michelle say, "Maybe you shouldn't have been so harsh. She is your mother, after all." "I don't care," Stephen snapped. "She crossed the line. Let her get out and live her own life. We'll see how she manages without us." I quietly opened the front door and stepped outside. It was a sunny morning. Neighbors were busy in their gardens. Someone was walking their dog. A typical summer day in the suburbs of San Antonio. I walked slowly down the sidewalk without looking back. My face was still burning from the tea. My blouse clung uncomfortably to my body, but strangely, I felt lighter than I had in months. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Where to now? I thought, stopping at the corner. I had a decent amount of money in my account, but no place to stay. I could have called Clara or David, but I didn't want to drag them into my conflict with Stephen. I took out my phone and called a taxi to the nearest hotel. After all, I could afford it now. And then there would be a new life, one with no place for those who didn't know how to appreciate and respect others. Sitting on a bench waiting for the taxi, I suddenly caught myself smiling. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The Riverview Hotel turned out to be a real lifesaver. The spacious room with air conditioning, a soft bed, and a large bathroom seemed like a palace after the cramped guest bedroom at Stephen's house. The first thing I did was take a long, hot shower, washing away not only the sticky traces of tea, but all the negativity of my past life. Red burn marks remained on my skin, but fortunately, they weren't too serious. The hotel manager, noticing my condition, offered a first aid kit. I carefully applied healing ointment. When I was done, I sat on the edge of the bed and allowed myself to fully comprehend what had happened. My own son had kicked me out of my home. He had poured hot tea on me, called me a beggar, and thrown me out like trash. And he had done all this in front of his wife and children, who did nothing to stop him. Strangely, instead of the despair I expected, I felt only emptiness and a slight bitterness. It was as if the last thread connecting me to Stephen had finally snapped, freeing me from any illusions or hopes for our relationship. I took out my phone and, after a moment's hesitation, dialed Edward's number. Despite it being his day off, he answered almost immediately. "Eleanor, is something wrong?" His voice was concerned, and it touched me unexpectedly. Holding back tears, I briefly told him what had happened. "My God," Edward exhaled when I finished. "That's terrible. Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" "No, just minor burns," I replied. "I'm at the Riverview Hotel. They have everything here." "Stay there," he said firmly. "I'll call my friend at the real estate agency. We'll find you a decent place to live, not just a temporary shelter." After talking to Edward, I felt a little better. At least I had a job, money, and the prospect of a place to live. Not bad for a woman my age who had just been kicked out of her home by her son. My next call was to Clara. I didn't want to disturb her on her day off, but I felt I had to tell at least one of my children what had happened before Stephen did, in his version. "Mom," Clara answered, surprised. "You rarely call on Saturdays." "I'm not living with Stephen anymore," I said, deciding not to beat around the bush. "What? Why? What happened?" I told her everything, trying to be objective and not exaggerate, although some details, like the hot tea, still made her gasp in outrage. "Oh my God, Mom, that's awful," she exclaimed. "Do you want Mark and me to come over, or you can fly out to Portland?" "No, honey," I replied gently. "I'll be fine. I have a job and money for housing." "A job?" Clara asked. "You mean volunteering at the library? But does that pay?" And then I decided it was time to tell the truth. At least to Clara, the most sensitive of my children. "Actually, I don't work at the library," I confessed. "I'm the chief financial officer at Pierce Construction. I make $75,000 a month." There was silence on the other end of the line. And then Clara burst out laughing. "Mom, you're joking, right? $75,000 a month? That's insane." "It's true," I said calmly. "Edward Pierce, my former boss, offered me the job 2 months ago. I kept it a secret from Stephen and his family because, well, you know why." We talked for almost an hour. Clara bombarded me with questions about my job, my plans and again offered to come and help. I assured her I could manage, but promised to keep her posted. After talking to my daughter, I called David. My younger son's reaction was more subdued. He had never been particularly emotional, but I could sense his genuine outrage at Stephen's behavior and his relief that I was okay. I was awakened the next morning by a call from Edward. "Eleanor, my friend Marcus from the real estate agency has found something special for you. It's an apartment in River Heights, a new gated community with a pool and spa. It's a 2-bedroom with a view of the river. If you're interested, he can show it to you today." I agreed to take a look, though I doubted such an apartment would be within my budget. River Heights was one of San Antonio's most prestigious residential complexes. Marcus, an energetic man in his 50s, met me at the entrance. The grounds were impressive: manicured lawns, fountains, winding paths among flowering shrubs. The apartment itself was simply stunning. A spacious living room with panoramic windows overlooking the river, a modern kitchen, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and even a small study. Marcus named the price, and I was surprised. It was well within my means with my new salary. "The owner is going abroad for 3 years and wants to rent to a reliable tenant," Marcus explained. "I told him about you, the CFO of a reputable company, recommended by Edward Pierce himself. He agrees to a long-term lease with a fixed rate and the right of first refusal if you decide to stay." The next day, I signed the lease, and by evening, I had moved my few belongings from the hotel. The empty rooms looked stark, but that was a temporary problem. Now, I had the means to furnish the place to my liking. On Monday, I returned to work with renewed energy. My colleagues noticed the change in my mood. I looked more energetic and focused, despite all the ups and downs of the weekend. Over the next 2 weeks, I immersed myself completely in setting up my new life. By day, I worked at the office, where Edward and I prepared the company for sale. In the evenings, I worked on the apartment, buying furniture, dishes, and textiles, gradually turning the empty space into a real home. I allowed myself a little luxury: a designer sofa, a bed with an orthopedic mattress I'd long dreamed of, a dining set of natural wood. Each new item seemed to reinforce my new identity as a successful, independent woman who could afford to live the way she wanted. One evening, as Edward and I stayed late discussing negotiation strategy with potential buyers, he suddenly asked, "How do you get to work, Eleanor?" "By taxi," I replied. "It's convenient from River Heights. It's not far." "Why don't you buy a car?" Edward suggested. "Your contract includes a company car, but you haven't used it yet." I thought about it. Indeed, there was a clause about a company car, but with moving from Stevens and settling into my new apartment, I simply hadn't had time to look into it. "I haven't driven in years," I admitted. "After Arthur died, we only had one car, and Stephen took it when he left for college. After that, I just got used to public transportation." "But you know how to drive?" Edward asked. "Of course, I just haven't practiced in a while." "Then it's settled," he smiled, his characteristic, determined smile. "Tomorrow, we're going to pick out a car for you. And not just any boring little runabout, but something befitting your new status." The next day, despite his failing health, Edward personally drove me to the car dealership. Not just any car dealership, but a Jaguar dealership, one of the most prestigious in the city. "Edward, this is too much," I protested when I realized where we were. "I don't need such an expensive car." "Eleanor," he said seriously, turning to me, "I won't be around much longer. I want to do something good for people who deserve it. Let me do this." The sales manager, recognizing Edward, greeted us with open arms and led us into the showroom where gleaming cars, each worth more than I had earned in my entire life, stood. "You need something elegant but with character," the manager said, looking me up and down. "May I suggest the F-Type? It's our sports convertible. Amazing handling, acceleration from 0 to 60 in 4 seconds, and absolute comfort." He led us to a gleaming dark blue car with a cream leather interior. It looked like a work of art. Sweeping lines, predatory headlights, elegant curves. The manager arranged a test drive, and 20 minutes later, we were leaving the showroom in an F-Type with an instructor in the passenger seat. Edward stayed behind, not feeling well enough for such excitement. I felt uncertain during the first few minutes behind the wheel. Too many buttons, too sensitive pedals, too powerful an engine. But gradually, under the instructor's guidance, I began to get used to it. And when we pulled onto the highway and I truly felt what this car was capable of, I was overcome with pure delight. "You're doing great," praised the instructor. "For someone who hasn't driven in a long time, you have excellent reflexes." Back in the showroom, I knew I couldn't give up this car. It seemed to embody my new life, bright, fast-paced, full of possibilities. 2 days later, I became the owner of a new Jaguar F-Type, a dark blue beauty that now stood proudly in my parking space at River Heights. The company paid for the car in full as part of my severance package and even arranged for intensive driving lessons with a professional instructor. It was like the world had opened up to me. With my own apartment, a prestigious job, and a luxury car, I felt 10 years younger. I was literally bursting with energy. I took long walks along the waterfront, joined the pool at our complex, and even started yoga classes for seniors. My physical transformation continued. I updated my wardrobe, choosing elegant but modern clothes that flattered my figure rather than hiding it under shapeless robes. A stylist at a fashion salon gave me a new haircut and taught me natural makeup that refreshed my face without looking vulgar. "You've literally blossomed," Edward remarked when I showed up at the office in a new lavender suit with my hair done. "You look like you've aged 15 years. "I feel like I have," I admitted. "It's like I've started my life over again." And it was true. For the first time in many years, I felt like I wasn't just a function, a mother, a grandmother, a housekeeper, but a complete person with my own desires, ambitions, and the right to happiness. I talked regularly with Clara and David, who were delighted to see the changes in me. Clara even flew in for the weekend to see my new apartment and, of course, my car. "My goodness, Mom, you look amazing," she exclaimed, hugging me at the airport. "And that's your car? Seriously?" We had a wonderful weekend, walking around the city, dining at nice restaurants, talking about everything under the sun. Clara admitted she had never seen me so happy and energetic. "You know, I always worried about you," she said as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, sipping wine and watching the sunset over the river. "I was afraid you'd end up living alone in your old house, counting every penny. And then when you moved in with Stephen, I felt something was wrong, but I didn't know how bad it was." "I didn't realize how bad it was either," I admitted, not until I had a chance to see it from the outside. After Clara left, David came to visit. He took 3 days off work and flew in from Chicago. When he saw my new life, he just shook his head respectfully. "Wow, Mom, you showed us all up." We had a wonderful time together. Unlike my sister, David was more practical and helped me with a few technical issues. He set up my computer, installed a security system, and even hung shelves in the closet. "You know," he said as we said goodbye at the airport, "I always knew you were special, but you've exceeded all expectations." His words touched me deeply. For the first time in a long time, I felt that my children, at least 2 of them, saw me not just as a mother, but as a person with my own achievements and strengths. Work was also going well. Edward and I completed the restructuring and began negotiations with potential buyers. Edward's condition was deteriorating. He now came to the office only once a week and spent most of his time working from home or in the hospital, but his mind remained sharp, and we continued to function as a well-oiled team. In early August, Edward Pierce called me to his home. His condition had significantly deteriorated. He was no longer able to come to the office and spent most of his time in bed, under the supervision of a nurse. But his mind remained clear, and his interest in the company's affairs was unabated. "Eleanor," he said as I settled into a chair by his bed with a folder of documents on my lap. "Any news on potential buyers?" "Yes, and good news," I smiled. "Bradford Industries has raised its offer to $120 million. Their lawyers are already drafting the contract." "Excellent," Edward smiled weakly. "I hope I live to see the signing." "Don't say that," I covered his hand with mine. "You'll see your company pass into good hands." We discussed a few business matters. Then the conversation unexpectedly turned personal. "How's your son?" Edward asked. You didn't tell me if you've had any contact with him since that incident. None, I shook my head. He called a few times, left messages, but I didn't call back. That's the right thing to do, Edward nodded. But my daughter told me something interesting. Her husband works at the insurance company where your Stephen used to work. It turns out he was fired for a serious mistake in the reports that cost the company a major client. I see. I felt a slight pang of regret, but nothing more. That's too bad. That's not all, Edward continued. Rumor has it he's in serious financial trouble. The bank is threatening to foreclose on his house for late payments. He and his wife are trying to sell it quickly, but the market isn't very favorable right now. I was silent, not knowing what to say. On one hand, I felt sorry for Stephen. No matter how badly he had treated me, he was still my son. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was some kind of higher justice at play. I'm not telling you this to gloat, Edward said gently, noticing my confusion. I just thought you should know. Maybe it's time to get your things out of his house before it's too late. Maybe you're right, I replied thoughtfully. There are photos, letters, a few mementos I didn't have time to take with me that day. Then don't put it off, Edward advised. And don't let him hurt you again. You deserve better. That evening, I called Clara to find out what she knew about Stephen. She confirmed Edward's words and added a few details. Michelle called me last week, Mom. They're really in a desperate situation. Stephen can't find a new job. He was fired in a scandal and didn't get any references. They're selling their house, their car, even their furniture. Michelle asked if I could lend them some money. And what did you say? That we're in a difficult situation ourselves right now, Clara sighed. And it's true. Mark is waiting for a promotion, but it's been put on hold because of restructuring at his company. And the children. You know how much education costs these days. I know, dear, I said gently. You did the right thing. Mom, Clara's voice grew quieter. Don't you think you should help them? I know Stephen did a terrible thing, but he's still your son. I thought about it. Did I really want to help Stephen after everything he had done to me? After all the humiliation, after he had thrown me out and poured hot tea on me? I don't know, I replied. Honestly, I need to think about it. But first, I want to get my things. I'll call him tomorrow and arrange a meeting. After talking to Clara, I sat on the balcony of my apartment for a long time, looking at the lights of San Antonio at night and thinking about the vicissitudes of fate. For months ago, I was a powerless pensioner living in my son's house as a free servant. Now, I was a successful financial director with a luxurious apartment and a sports car. And now Stephen, who had treated me so cruelly, found himself in a desperate situation. Was there some kind of higher justice at work here? Or was it just a coincidence? What should I do now? Help him, or let him reap the rewards of his actions? In the morning, I called Stephen. He answered almost immediately, and there was a strange excitement in his voice. Mom, is that you? Yes, Stephen, I tried to speak calmly. I'd like to pick up my things that are still at your place. When can I come over? Of course, he said with unusual helpfulness. You can come anytime. I will be home all day. Then I'll come tomorrow around 11, I said. Okay, Mom. And I wanted to say, I'm really glad you called. We missed you. I almost laughed at the sudden change in tone. Not long ago, he'd called me a beggar and kicked me out. Now, suddenly, he missed me. Had Clara told him about my new job, or was he so desperate he was willing to humiliate himself for financial help? See you tomorrow, Stephen, I said, and hung up without responding to his sentimental outburst. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing an elegant ivory-sheath dress, low-heeled shoes, and minimalist gold jewelry. I did my makeup and styled my hair. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. The well-groomed, confident woman was so different from the downtrodden old woman I had been just a few months ago. At exactly 10:30, I got into my Jaguar and headed for Stephen's house. The weather was beautiful. Bright August sunshine, a light breeze, perfect conditions for a drive with the top down. The car glided smoothly, attracting admiring glances from passers-by and other drivers. Who would have thought that at 68, I'd be driving a sports convertible and enjoying every minute of it? When I turned onto Stephen Street, my heart involuntarily beat faster. I hadn't been here since the day my son kicked me out. The neighborhood looked the same: neat houses, trimmed lawns, children's bicycles on driveways. But now I looked at it all as if from the outside, as a stranger, not a resident. Stephen's house stood out, and not in a good way. The lawn was unkempt. There were oil stains on the driveway, and a for sale sign with a real estate agent's number stood on the lawn. I parked the Jaguar right in front of the house, turned off the engine, and froze for a moment, gathering my thoughts. What did I feel? Strangely enough, almost nothing. No anger, no resentment, no desire for revenge or gloating. Just a calm confidence that this stage of my life was over, and I had come to put an end to it. I got out of the car, straightened my shoulders, and headed for the front door. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open and Stephen appeared on the threshold. He had lost weight and looked haggard. His eyes were sunken, with dark circles, and there was clearly more gray in his hair. "Mom," he exclaimed with exaggerated joy. "I'm so glad to see you." He took a step forward as if to hug me, but I took a small step back, and he stopped, awkwardly lowering his arms. "Hello, Stephen," I said calmly. "I've come for my things." "Yes, of course," he nodded, still forcing a smile. "Come in, please. Michelle has made tea and cookies." I walked into the house, noting how much had changed in such a short time. Some furniture was gone, pictures were off the walls, and what remained looked neglected and dreary. There was a strange smell in the air, a mixture of stale food, dust, and general desolation. Michelle was waiting for me in the living room, wearing what she apparently considered her best dress, a little outdated and not particularly flattering on her plump figure. Noah and Grace sat nearby on the sofa, unusually quiet and clearly embarrassed. "Eleanor," Michelle stepped toward me with a fake smile. "How wonderful to see you. You look stunning." Her voice sounded genuinely surprised, her gaze appraising my outfit, my hairstyle, my jewelry, everything so different from my former appearance. "Thank you, Michelle," I nodded. "You too. You look well." The last sentence was a blatant lie. Michelle looked exhausted and unkempt, with messy makeup and dull hair. "Please sit down," Stephen said, pointing to a chair. "Would you like some tea or coffee?" "No, thank you." I remained standing. "I don't have much time. I just wanted to pick up my things." "Yes, of course." Stephen rubbed his hands nervously. "I packed everything into boxes. They're in the garage. But maybe you'd like to stay for a while? We haven't seen each other in so long." "And whose fault is that?" I asked, not raising my voice, but firmly. Stephen blushed and lowered his eyes. "Mom, we're all very sorry about what happened. I wasn't myself. I said some terrible things. It's unforgivable, I know, but maybe we could start over." I looked closely at my son. His eyes showed despair, but not remorse. He looked like a drowning man clutching at straws, not a person who sincerely regretted his actions. "Stephen," I said calmly, "let's not pretend. You found out about my new job from Clara or David and decided I could help you out with money. That's why you suddenly remembered your family ties." "What?" "No." He feigned indignation. "How could you think that? We all missed you. Right, kids?" Noah and Grace nodded in unison, but their faces remained impassive. It was obvious they had been forced to participate in the charade. "Mom, I heard you're working at your old company now," Stephen continued, clearly changing tactics. "That's great. I always knew you were a great professional. And is that your car outside?" "Impressive." "Yes, that's my Jaguar." I allowed myself a slight smile. "A company car. Part of my compensation package as CFO, Chief Financial Officer." Michelle couldn't hide her surprise. "But you said you were a volunteer at the library." I lied, I replied simply. "I didn't want you to know about my real job and salary." "Salary?" Stephen leaned forward. "And how much do you make, if you don't mind me asking?" $75,000 a month, I said calmly, without boasting, simply stating a fact. The room fell silent. Stephen froze with his mouth open. Michelle turned pale. The children showed their first sign of interest, looking at each other in surprise. $75,000 a month, Stephen repeated slowly, as if he couldn't believe his ears. "But that's more than you made in a year at the insurance company," I finished for him. "Yes, life is full of irony, isn't it, Mom?" That's amazing. Steven seemed to have finally found his voice. I'm so happy for you. And it's for the best that it turned out this way. You've gained independence, a new life. Thanks to you kicking me out of the house and pouring hot tea on me. I raised an eyebrow. Well, that's not what I meant, he said, embarrassed. It's just, everything's for the best, right? Maybe I agreed. But don't pretend you wanted to help me. You wanted to get rid of the burden, as you called me. Mom, I was wrong. Steven took a step toward me, his voice pleading. I admit it. I acted terribly, but we all make mistakes, right? Didn't you teach us to forgive? Yes, I nodded. And I forgive you, Steven. But that doesn't mean I'll forget, or that I should put myself at risk of being treated that way again. But we've changed. Michelle interjected. The last few months have been difficult for us. We've reevaluated a lot of things. Yeah, especially when you found out I make $75,000 a month. I couldn't resist the sarcasm. Eleanor, we're truly sorry. Michelle moved closer, her voice honeyed. And we'd like you to be part of our family again. You mean you'd like my money to be part of your family? I corrected her. Let's be honest, at least now, Mom. Don't be like that. Steven took another step toward me. Of course, things are tough for us financially right now, but it's not about the money. It's just that I've realized how much you mean to us. I sighed. His insincerity was almost palpable. Where are my things, Steven? I asked, deciding not to continue this pointless conversation. In the garage, he said, visibly deflated. I'll walk you out. We walked through the kitchen to the garage where there were indeed 3 cardboard boxes with Mom written on the side. That's everything, Steven said. I tried not to forget anything. Your photo albums, books, personal items. I opened the top box and glanced through the contents. Everything looked fine. My old photos, letters, a few mementos. Thanks, I nodded. Can you help me carry them to the car? Steven picked up 2 boxes, and I took the third, the lightest one. We left the house and headed for my Jaguar. Michelle and the children followed, clearly not wanting to miss the spectacle. Wow, Noah breathed, speaking for the first time since I had arrived. Is that really your car, Grandma? Yes, Noah, it's my car, I said, opening the trunk, which was large enough to hold all 3 boxes. Cool, the boy muttered with reluctant admiration. Steven carefully placed the boxes in the trunk and turned to me. Mom, please, let's talk. I know I did a terrible thing, but I'm your son, your flesh and blood. Can you give me a second chance? I looked at him closely. Standing before me was a grown man, my own child, whom I had given birth to, raised, and sacrificed myself for over many years. But in his eyes, I saw only calculation and despair, not love or remorse. You know, Steven, I said calmly, when you kicked me out of the house, you called me a beggar and said I was nobody, that I was living in your house out of the goodness of your heart. You didn't see me as a person, just a function, a convenient servant who cooked, cleaned, and looked after the children. I was wrong, he said, lowering his eyes. I didn't mean it. No, you did, I shook my head. And you know what's the saddest part? I almost believed you. I almost believed that I was nobody, that I didn't deserve respect or a decent life. But now I know that's not true. I closed the trunk and walked around the car to get behind the wheel. Mom, please. Steven followed me. We're on the verge of bankruptcy. The bank is taking the house. I don't have a job. The kids could end up on the street. I'm sorry you're in this situation, I said sincerely. But you're a grown man, Steven. You'll manage. But you could help. His voice took on a familiar, demanding tone. You make a fortune, and your own son could end up homeless. Like you once said to me, I opened the car door. Let's see how you manage without us. Now it's your turn to find out the answer to that question. You can't do this. Steven's voice became hysterical. I'm your son. Yes, you're my son, I said, getting behind the wheel. And that's exactly why I'm not just going to give you money. It won't help you become a better person. Maybe when you face the consequences of your actions, you'll finally learn to appreciate other people and treat them with respect. I started the engine, and the powerful roar of the motor made Steven take a step back. Goodbye, Steven, I said. I wish you and your family all the best. Mom, he made one last desperate attempt. You can't just leave. We're family. Family isn't just blood, I replied. It's mutual respect, care, and support. When you're ready for a real family relationship, you know where to find me. With that, I pulled away, leaving Stephen, Michelle, Noah, and Grace standing on the driveway with confused and angry faces. As I pulled onto the highway, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not malice, not vengeful satisfaction, but relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in many years, I was completely free. Free from guilt, from false responsibility, from toxic relationships. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, sipping a glass of fine wine and looking out at the lights of San Antonio. The boxes of things from Stephen's house stood unpacked in the corner of the living room. I decided to sort through them tomorrow with a clear head. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Clara. "Mom, how did it go?" Her voice sounded worried. "Fine," I replied calmly. "I got my things and left." "And Stephen? Did he ask for help?" "Yes," I smiled. As soon as he found out about my salary, he remembered that I was his beloved mother. "And what did you decide?" Clara asked cautiously. I refused, I replied simply. Not because I want to get back at him, but because it won't help him become a better person. He has to deal with the consequences of his actions himself. There was silence on the other end. Then Clara said quietly, "You know, Mom, I think you're right. Stephen has always been complicated. Maybe this is exactly what he needs." Maybe I agreed. Time will tell. After talking to my daughter, I returned to the balcony. The night was warm, with a light breeze carrying the scent of blossoming trees from the waterfront. Somewhere in the distance, music played, and I could hear the laughter of people living their lives, with their joys and sorrows. I thought about how strange life was. 6 months ago, I was a dependent, downtrodden old woman whom my own son considered a burden. Now, I was a successful, financially independent woman with my own home, car, and most importantly, a sense of self-worth. Money had certainly changed my life for the better. It had given me freedom, comfort, and opportunities one never had before. But true wealth did not come with a bank account, but with the realization of my own worth, the ability to defend my boundaries, and the courage to live the way I believe is right. I'm still processing all of this, and the truth is, I sometimes wonder if I was too harsh. If this happened to you, to what lengths would you go to protect your peace and reclaim your dignity? Or would you put blood before boundaries? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm reading everything.